Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and you're listening to EP Talk, the place where emergency physicians come to talk about things that are relevant to our professional lives as well as our personal lives. And in this situation, my guest today is Kevin Spencer, who is an engineer as well as an emergency physician, and he invented a product we're going to talk about in a minute called Ring Rescue. But I actually have a personal experience with this, and it illustrates some of the things that Kevin's going to talk about with the product. Before we talk about that, we're gonna jump into this issue, that something that's actually more prescient. Kevin, being an engineer, you engineered this thing with Ring Rescue, but when the COVID pandemic came along, we were looking for ways to increase oxygenation to patients, and you kind of threw your engineering hat on and attacked that. What'd you do with that? Tell me about that.
Yeah, we have a good engineering team. So two of my partners in Ring Rescue are both engineers, and we all like to invent stuff. It's just our nature. And with COVID, it took everybody by storm, and it emerged onto the world stage, and it really looked like a big problem. So we really wanted to try to pivot a little bit and come up with some solutions. And so we just looked at a variety of things that we could do locally to help with COVID. And we looked at everything from vent splitters, and there's some neat open source designs out there that we looked at. And we looked at infection control as well. And one of the things that we came up with was really combining point source ventilation, so making a mini isolation room right around the head of the bed or head of a patient with a barrier shield that was movable. And we've seen different intubation guards and boxes and that type of stuff as a barrier shield with COVID. This concept was more of a flexible, movable bassinet cover, I guess. It looks like a baby carriage bassinet cover that has a bit of a vacuum source attached. And it was a neat idea, and it works, and it certainly is a solution we're offering to the world in infection control. If that helps your hospitals, you can build it, or we can help you build it. And we looked at a few other solutions along the way as well, with respirators and using what they call elastomeric respirators as a strategy to save N95s. And a lot of some of these ideas were ours. Some of them are ideas that have floated around that we tried to figure out how to implement. But we did come up with a few things that we hope will help people with the COVID fight.
You know, you are a classic emergency physician, because one of the things that I noticed when I got into this field 25, 35 years ago was that it was a brand new field, and people were attacking problems, and the people in emergency medicine were looking at problems and saying, how can we do this? And as a result, I think that emergency physicians have spawned more inventors and inventions and gadgets and gizmos and new ways of attacking problems than probably any other specialty. And so Emergency Physicians Monthly is, we've been around a long time, but one of the things we've always tried to do is to find those products and those inventors and those engineers like yourself, and to bring them to the fore and be the champion of physician innovators. So it's a real pleasure to have you here and to talk about something you developed was Ring Rescue. And I have to say that at the ACEP last year, the guys came by and they said, we've got this new device for taking rings off. And it's always been kind of a straightforward problem. Yeah, you either lube them up and try to get them off, or you cut them off. Except that there are lots of exceptions. It's more exceptions than rules in this situation. And so I showed them my ring that I have worn since 1974, and I said, this has never been off my hand, never. My wife gave it to me. It's a cheap ring we bought at when we were young kids, and my hand is significantly larger than it used to be, and it's never been off there. I don't think that you can safely get this ring off my hand. And they said, put it on camera. We'll show you we can do it. And sure enough, the device, and you'll tell about how the device works, and I won't go into the procedure and everything, but they were able to get it off my hand, which is shocking. I did not believe without cutting that ring, you'd be able to get it off my hand. And it did get me in trouble though, because I was at the convention without my wife, and when I actually had to call home on a visual phone and show her that I had actually gotten the ring off, and explain to her that no, I was not going to a bar that night and trying to work to get my ring off. But it's a great invention. And and I want to kind of bring up that whole issue about rings, because rings have been around forever, and um, they're new product, they're new materials now, and I just want to ask you, kind of, what's the problem with getting rings off?
Well, yeah, no. So first of all, I believe you called it the Stuck Ring Challenge, which will live in infamy, I think now. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun at ACEP. We had a great show there, and with stuck rings, I think everybody probably can identify with the problem on some level. As emergency docs, we see the stuck rings. Many people have a personal story of them or somebody they know with a stuck ring, and when we look at the stuck ring problem, I mean, this is one of many things we see in the emergency department that is just sort of, you see it and you do things the way you've always done it. And we just kind of thought there's got to be a better way of doing it. And when you look back in history, it looks like people, like humans, been wearing rings for 4,000 or 5,000 years. So they've been around for a long time. They're probably going to stay around for a long time.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, the ring fit on that finger in only one way. It fit. That's how it got there. And so the ring didn't get smaller, it's the finger that got bigger, and that's why it's stuck. And so we just looked at tackling that challenge, really, and how do we make a finger smaller so we can get these rings off without cutting them, of course.
Yeah, because they mean something. I obviously could have cut it off a long time ago, and my wife's been after me to buy. We were kids. Like I say, the ring probably cost me less than $75, and she wanted to get me a nicer ring, and lifetimes have changed. We've been successful, and she wanted to get me a different ring, but there was no getting that ring off without cutting it. And everybody said, "Oh, what's the deal? Cut it." No, you don't understand. Cutting it is a big deal. It meant something that it wasn't cut. And so to be able to get that ring off intact was a big deal. Okay, there's and everybody's got their own method for doing this. Okay, and I guarantee you, we had tried a few of them. Why don't you tell me about some of the traditional methods of trying to get rings off?
Yeah, I think everybody, there's a lot of what I'll call sort of hack kind of solutions to a number of problems, and some of these work reasonably well. And so a lot of the methods that are out there have to do with what we'll call the string wrap style. So you wrap a coil of something around your finger, and sometimes it's dental floss. A lot of people use suture material, like the Silco suture material. Penrose drains. There's some literature around using Penrose drains, which is basically an elastic band, essentially. So the whole wrap method has been around for some time, and sometimes these wrap methods, of course, will go under the ring, and you try and therefore unwind it after you've winded it up, and you try and unwind the ring. And other times you just use it as a compression method. And those have been, described in emergency medicine for quite some time. I've certainly tried those over the years. I've never had great success with those types of methods. One of the issues with wrap methods is if you're wrapping string in a sequence around a finger, anyone who's done it can probably identify this. There's little skin bulges that stick up between the winds, and it tends to be quite tight. And then if you double wind it, you're adding diameter, which is not what you want to get the ring off. And so it's actually surprisingly, technical and tricky to do that. Some people do great with that. I never have myself. And so the wrap methods, and then there's the lubrication, which really just is to help slip any ring over the finger. You should use some sort of lubrication, and there's lots of different things out there. And we actually spend a lot of time looking into lubrication as well. And some of the common ones out there, a lot of jewelry stores, for example, will talk about Windex, which works great as a lubricant, honestly, except it's a cleaning product. And if you use it as a cleaning product, that's fine. But if you use it as a lubricant, the SDS sheet, the material sheet, the hospitals don't like it so much. It's just not made for skin to be applied as a lubricant, so you really can't use it in the hospital for that reason. But Vaseline, it's messy. There's lots of other lubricants out there. One thing we learned about lubricants as well, actually, is that they can be hydrating, and often they're meant to be hydrating. And when something's hydrating, it tends to actually add volume to the skin, and that's not what you want when you have a tight ring. So you'd like to stay away from things that are hydrating if you want to use a lubricant. And then cooling is a very common method. People will just put their hand in a bucket full of ice. As you know, if it's a cold day, your ring tends to be a little looser than a hot day, and so people will try cooling methods to try and help decrease the finger size with variable success. And then, of course, ring cutting is one of the traditional methods that still we use all the time when you have a ring that you have to get off without any other means. And ring cutting can be fairly simple in the case of a gold ring, or it can be very almost impossible in the case of some rings that are very difficult to cut or very swollen fingers. And ring cutting is an interesting one because as many of your listeners will know, just because you make a cut in a ring doesn't mean the ring's coming off. You either have to make a second cut and have a clamshell, or you have to get out these pliers and start twisting the ring into some sort of contorted mess to be able to kind of get it off. And thicker rings with more structural integrity of memory, and they kind of snap back, and the pliers slip, and the sharp edges. So ring cutting can be easy or it can be difficult, as we all know. And those are the traditional methods, really, the kind of the wraps and the lubricants and cooling and cutting. And so we looked at those and decided to try to come up with a modified process or a different way of approaching it.
It's interesting about rings today is that they're actually different than the rings of many, say decades ago. Wedding bands used to be relatively thin and, soft gold and things that were relatively easy to cut and once cut, relatively easy to bend. And yet the new rings are oftentimes jewels all the way around, certainly decorative rings, wedding bands, that sort of thing. And then some of them are dang long. I mean, they can be really big. I mean, almost like a bushing, like a cylinder of some type, and cutting through. And then the materials themselves are titanium and some things that are very, very difficult to cut. So even if you think that, oh, that's the gold standard, I can always cut this thing off, you may or may not be able to do that. And I'm sure you found that when you were, working on this invention.
Yeah, we've looked at all the different materials, and we've actually tried to cut them just so we can really understand the problem statement. And so we've bought all the different cutters not all of them. We've bought 6 different cutters, a couple mostly manual ones. We have 2 electric ones. We tried different blades, the little serrated blades and the diamond tip blades. We tried to cut all these different rings: titanium, tungsten, cobalt, silver, gold, fake gold. I'm not sure what fake gold is, but it's difficult to cut. And then different sizes. And yeah, some rings, well, I guess every material has its own approach to cutting, which is a whole, I guess, topic in of itself. Some cutters, they get gummed up when you cut certain metals, and other cutters don't and require the diamond tip blades to go through, such as titanium and tungsten. And even with those, the rings can get hot and it can take time to get through them, and a dull blade will make the problem much worse. And so the ring material and the matching that with the right cutter is really a relatively new problem, I think, in ring removal, because, as you noted, a lot of these materials didn't really exist historically as a common ring choice. I think probably our most interesting ring, because you mentioned size of the ring makes a difference. Of course it does. We had a Blue Jays World Series championship ring that had to come off preoperatively. An orthopedic surgeon colleague in Toronto was faced with that problem, and of course he didn't want to cut that off just because of the heritage behind the ring, right? And so and so we were able to send him a device, and he was able to get it off what we call non-destructively, meaning without damage or cutting, which is great. I love to hear that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. The rings today, you see, when I was in Iraq, I had a guy who was over there who we had to get a ring off of him, and it was from the ring from winning the Talladega Motor Speedway race. This thing was huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge, and there was no way we were going to be able to cut that thing off. And so, you're absolutely right. Well, tell me, okay, now we're down to tell me about the ring rescue device. What is it exactly?
Yeah, well, it's essentially a compression device, and so I can show you in the video. I don't, for folks just listening, you might not be able to see the video, but basically what it is, it's almost like a mini blood pressure cuff that fits over top of the finger, and it gets inflated with air. And so there's a manual pump attached to it. And when you pump it up with air, you're delivering essentially around 300 millimeters of mercury pressure, which is kind of comparable to a blood pressure cuff in many ways. And what it does is it applies targeted pressure externally to the ring finger or to the affected finger. And by applying pressure, what you're doing is you're essentially shrinking the tissues. And if you imagine if you wear tight socks on your ankle, it leaves a dent on your ankle. It's just because of the elastic force moves fluid out of the way. And it's the same idea with your ring. You put this over your finger, you apply external compression, you leave it on there for 5 minutes, you take the device off, and what you've done is you've shrunk the finger. And now what you need to do, of course, is now you need to apply some lubricant and use some ring removal techniques to take the ring off. And so the ring rescue compression device shrinks the finger in essence.
Now, the interesting thing, having done this, is that you sort of think about the ring rescue, the compression device. Oh, okay, that's novel. That's the idea. But you guys actually did a lot more in studying how to get a ring off. That was actually just sort of half the situation, because shrinking the finger was one thing, but the other was actually the technique of actually getting the ring off. Because once they got it smaller, it still was a challenge. And talk about some of the things, ways that people can approach getting the ring off even after it's shrunk down.
Absolutely. And it becomes, I guess, a bit of a physics, question. You look at the ring and you look at the finger and you see, can we make this fit, first of all? And that's where the compression comes in. And usually, in some cases, it becomes simple. The ring comes off fairly easily, but in many cases, it's not that simple, and it's still fairly tight. And that's really where the techniques that we're talking about here become important. And as I mentioned, lubrication is the first thing you want to do is apply some lubricant, not just onto the finger, but onto the ring, and then rotate the ring a few times and get the lubricant underneath the ring circumferentially around the finger. So you really maximize that. The next thing you want to do, often with smooth rings, it's a little bit hard to grip them when they're lubricated, as you can imagine. And if you really want to manipulate a ring that's tight and smooth, your fingers can slip off of there. So you should put on a glove. Put on a nitrile glove. We find the nitrile gloves tend to work really well, especially if they have a little bit of texture on the finger grips. Some gloves are textured and some are not, and that allows you to actually grab a hold of the ring and manipulate it. Where in other cases you might be slipping and not being able to. And if you have a stone or other features that provide some contour of the surface, you might not need to do that. But on the smooth rings, you should definitely do that. Then the next thing you want to do is, how do you walk the ring off the finger? And there's kind of 3 or 4 different general styles of doing that. And one is just what we call a corkscrew, which I think most people just kind of default to. You just kind of screw it off as if it was a nut on a bolt, and you just continue to rotate it one direction, advancing it towards the tip of the finger, and that usually works pretty well. What we suggest is, take your time, because as you move it along, as you inch it along, the ring is also exerting a little bit of pressure, and that can move some locally, a little bit of fluid out of the way as well. And so just take your time, keep walking it down the finger, and then if you've come to a spot where you're stuck, then you can change gears a little bit. Sometimes a bit of a rock ring motion where you tip it forward and back. And even if you can kind of get over the knuckle, which is usually the point of maximal diameter where things really get hung up, if you bend the finger maybe 20 or 30 degrees at the knuckle, sometimes that provides you a little bit of a gap on the top and bottom surfaces to almost pull the ring over the knuckle. And then you can go back to your twisting and rocking. And a combination of these techniques, really will work, most of the time. I mean, we get most rings off with some expertise in some of these techniques. It does take long to figure it out, but it definitely, there's definitely an attention to detail when it comes to these techniques. And we're putting a fair bit of time into some videos to talk about some of these techniques, honestly, to try and share them with people, above and beyond using the ring rescue compression device, which is fairly, it's user friendly to use the device. It's very simple to put on the finger. But then when it comes to taking the ring off, using good technique is important, and we really want people to be successful and learn some of these techniques.
You mentioned a technique that I think that needs to be thought about, and that is that when you bend the finger as you're marching it forward, you're actually sort of that extra skin, you're kind of still pulling on it, okay? And when you bend the finger slightly, what you're actually doing is pulling some of that skin underneath. And that was the thing that was the part of the technique that I saw that the guys were successful in. When they bent my finger just a little bit, the skin on the top of my finger got tighter. And then when they were rocking it back and forth, top to bottom, they were able to move the top of it. And then when they straightened it out, they moved the bottom of it, bend it, move the top of it, straighten it out, use the bottom of it, and work it back and forth like that, rather than side to side necessarily. I was shocked. I mean, this ring was tight. I mean, I'm serious. This ring had been on there 44 years. And I said, there is no way this ring is coming off without getting cut. And they were able to walk it off. And my hands are significantly larger in my late 60s than they were in my early 20s. They were able to actually get it off, which is pretty interesting. And
we're trying to figure out where exactly the difficult cases are going to be, and there's some cases you can predict are going to be more difficult than others. In cases where the ring's been stuck for decades, I mean, those are expected to be more difficult for sure. New swelling like pitting edema is a classic. If a patient develops pitting edema from fluid overload, in the ICU, 6 or 8 liters of fluids for sepsis, or any number of other reasons why people get pitting edema in the upper extremities, that it responds extremely well to compression. Other tissue, changes less so, and there's a variety of factors that play into that. And so we're really trying to identify, you might look at a finger that almost looks like a sausage. It's so swollen, and the ring's really embedded in there. And you say there's no chance of that ring coming off, period. And if it's a pitting edema, the answer is, well, you'd be surprised. And then our case report, of course, shows some of those photos. Those are real cases. Those weren't difficult. But the difficult ones would be, I mean, your ring was quite stuck, and it really required a lot of technique in addition to using the device. And that combination, I guess it's kind of the ring rescue compression device plus you, the provider, is the recipe for success in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, that's kind of what the take home from that for me was, there was no way without the ring rescue that it was going to come off intact. There's no doubt. But it wasn't just the compression that did it. There was a lot of technique after that, and the fact that you've focused on a lot of different ways to actually work with the technique once the finger is shrunk down, because as you say, bone is bone. If you have osteoarthritis, there are certain expansions of the joint that that may not happen. There are going to be some that just don't come off. But I was shocked. I thought that I was going to be in that category. I was for sure that I was going to be in that category. And sure enough, you were able to get it off. Are there any other rings that you don't think can be taken off without cutting them? Any other exceptions you can think of?
Yeah, I think again it comes back to the physics problem in terms of if you can make, the ring once went on there. And so if you can restore the finger somewhere close to the size when the ring went on, you've got a good chance of taking the ring off. The osteoarthritis case is discussed a lot. A lot of people have concerns of, well, I have OA, it's not going to happen. I still think you want to try. There's no harm in trying.
Yeah.
You put the compression on and you see where you're at. You can usually tell by assessing it, and as you start removing the ring, if you bump up against an osteophyte, or if the bony size is clearly bigger than the ring, well, then I mean, that's not going to happen non-destructively, meaning you're going to have to cut that ring off to get it off. There's other examples, I mean, where you might just want to go to cutting. I mean, if somebody has a thin, easily cuttable ring that you really don't care about and you just want the damn thing off, and it's going to take you 20 seconds to cut it off, then just, that might be the easiest strategy, right? it's part of it really depends on what your patient wants. I mean, many people are very, very motivated to not damage those rings. But sometimes people really don't care, and it's a simple one to cut, which is great. Just cut it off if that's the best approach for the patient. There's a few cases where you might not want to use our device. So if the finger has sustained a severe injury, you certainly want to be careful. You don't want to, put compression or manipulate an injury adversely if you don't need to. So we have used it on fractured fingers and on lacerated fingers, but we use it, I guess, with under expert guidance, meaning you're an emerge doc, you know how to manage finger injuries, and you make a decision whether or not this is the right approach based on what you're looking at, what the patient wants, and what you think you can do as a best approach. And one of our in our GEMS article, one of our reports there was actually a finger fracture that worked. It was a great case for this. But if you had like a significant like a spiral fracture of the shaft or anything concerning that's an unstable fracture, you probably just don't want to put you don't want to manipulate it.
Yeah.
The caveat would be, let's say you have a tightly constricting ring, it's a tungsten ring or titanium ring that you can't cut, and you're kind of you're in trouble, right? You're looking at developing a vast, a strangulation type injury, a compression syndrome injury to the finger if you don't get this ring off. And it's sort of any port in a storm. You kind of use whatever techniques will solve the problem. That can come up as well, where you may want to use a combination of things. I've even heard of people calling the fire department to come in with bolt cutters in some of those scenarios where you've got a ring that you can't cut. And certainly ring rescue in those cases, you can just you comply the device to the patient, you work with them if it's a finger injury and say, well, if this is comfortable, we can try it, and if it becomes uncomfortable, we can stop. These are some of the caveats, but in general, it's a physics problem, and you kind of look what the problem is and what the solution set is from the toolbox in front of you, and you pick the right tools.
So the take homes are, make sure that you obviously, with everything else, you select your patients, just as you said, you select them according to their desires and their needs, and obviously you exclude those patients that would have an adverse reaction to it, and make sure that again, as you've indicated, not only do you shrink the finger down, but you use proper technique for getting the thing off. And the chances of success in your case are relatively high.
Yeah, we really do well. I mean, I'm obviously motivated to use this product because I basically designed it, and so I want this to succeed. And so when we use it, I'm very enthusiastic about using it, and our success rates are incredible, and basically almost all the time, over 90% for sure. And we're getting good case reports from people all over the place. This is a new product. It's only been out for just over a year now. And so I love hearing the case reports. I love hearing back from people about their stories. And anyone listening, please, if you have any stories, share them, and we'd love to hear about them, because we think that most, especially those patients that really care about these rings, and they get really, really upset when you're cutting them off or damaging them, even though often they can be fixed. It's still emotionally can be very, very difficult for people. And it's really nice to be able to take that ring off, and it's almost like a magic trick when it works. You take it off, you give it back to them, and you're the hero for a minute. It's like they had no expectation that this was going to end up that way, and for whatever reason, it's a very compelling moment for many people when you can just deliver them the ring, solve that problem.
You're a lot younger than me. Okay, you're a lot younger than me, and I remember the moment that my now wife of 47 years, she'd kill me if she knew that I stumbled on how many years, put that ring on my finger, and it meant something, that it was not cut, that it was continuous, and we wanted to replace it with a better ring, and to get it off intact meant it was a whole lot more than just the mechanics of it. I mean, you just have to understand, ornamental rings, fine. Yeah, Super Bowl rings, that's a mechanical issue. We just can't get the thing cut off. But for a lot of folks, that circle means something, and you don't want to break it. you don't want to cut it if you don't absolutely have to do it. And I will simply say that I was really pleased that I was able to say to my wife, even though she wasn't excited about me not being there when it came off, I was able to say to her that this ring came off intact. I still have it. I'll be able to give it to my children and grandchildren,
Yeah.
and we were very, very pleased that we were able to get it that way. Let me before I close out the podcast, how can people find out about Ring Rescue?
Yeah, so please visit our website. It's ringrescue.com.
Easy enough.
And we have lots of information on our website. We have videos. We're actually producing some new videos as we gain more information. We try to always update that. There's some great new videos coming out and tutorials on ring removal. As we kind of alluded to earlier, we were actually just in GEMS, Journal of Emerging Medical Services, with a case report series that was just published.
I saw
That's
that.
a great article. It just covers 6 different cases. All are quite compelling, and of course we have that on our website, as well as other news feeds and other interesting stories. And also you can find our distributors on there as well. So on our order page, you can see like Medline, Owens Minor, or you can reach out to us directly. And if you have interest in a hospital group, or if you're a distributor and you want to talk, just reach out to us, and that's how you find us, ringrescue.com.
That's great. That's great. Well, as I said at the beginning, Emergency Physicians Monthly has been kind of in the business of highlighting ER docs who have tackled unique problems to our specialty, and this is certainly one of them. And I'm pleased to find someone who has built a better mousetrap, and that's exactly what you've done.
Yeah.
You've built a better mousetrap, and there are obviously still places for other techniques and things, but this is definitely one I can put my personal experience behind that works for that very, very special ring that you don't want to have cut. But you don't see any other way to get it off. So for those of our listeners who are interested in advancing technologies, this is a very simple thing, but in actual fact, it works. And I would encourage you to look up ringrescue.com and consider it. So for everyone who's been listening to Kevin Spencer and myself today, thank you for listening to EP Talk, and join us again. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the show, Mark.